Yo guys, what is up? Welcome back to some more Zero Hour. Today I have a super exciting interview for you. It is with a guy named Mark Lorenzen, who was one of the main engineers who worked on Generals and Zero Hour alongside various other people, and that includes Chris Mornis, who you may remember that we interviewed just a few months ago. Now, this meeting was recorded on Zoom, so my camera definitely has better quality than last time. You'll remember last time it messed up, but Zoom captured this in a different format, which is one face at a time rather than both at the same time. So next time, of course, I'll try to capture both at the same time. But anyway, you're going to hear loads of stuff that's super interesting here from Mark, so let's get into it. Okay. Yeah, I think that started. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, welcome, Mark. Thank you very much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Like I just said, I play Zero Hour pretty much every day and have done for many years. And so even though I spoke to Chris, as you probably saw a few months ago, to be speaking to another developer now, it's actually it's kind of crazy, and yeah, the viewers and anyone watching this will really love it. So massively appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Richard.
So yeah, you were one of the primary developers. You said you worked alongside Chris Mornis, who we interviewed a few months ago,
Yes.
and you pretty much had the same role as him. Is that right?
Yeah, he and I had similar roles, and we kind of divided the responsibility of adding all of the zero-hour features to the General's code base.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
And yeah, just any background info you want to share about yourself. Like people might be interested, like where you're from. I guess you're from the US, but if you want to tell people,
Mhm. Yeah, grew up in California, and but I've been in Utah for the last 20 years.
okay,
I'm a veteran of the games industry. I started in '91, working for Sega. I don't know. Do you want to know my
yeah,
game pedigree? Yeah,
whatever you want to share, yeah, that's great. I did quickly Google your name and typed games after it, and it came up with a list. I think there was like, I don't know, 15-ish games. And I did see you worked at Sega for on a few games. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I've worked on. Last time I counted, it was like 32 or 33 different titles. But
Wow.
so started at Sega, where I was started as a background artist slash level designer, and then switched to coding in an interim position. But the so I worked on Vector Man as a designer. I worked on various sports games, Ren and Stimpy, um, various. So then I left Sega to join Shiny, and where I worked on Earthworm Jim.
Yeah.
Um, And then some friends and I formed a company called The Neverhood, where we worked on a game called The Neverhood Chronicles, and another one for the Sony PlayStation called Skull Monkeys, which was a 2D platformer. Um, then eventually I got the job working at Electronic Arts, which at the time was kind of transitioning from being Westwood Studios and was kind of going under the name, um, what were they calling themselves? Anyhow, they were in an Irvine office for a while, and that's when I started. And then they moved to Los Angeles like, within a year after that. And
Okay.
that was a combination of people who were formerly of Westwood Studios, and then people who were part of the various Los Angeles-based EA studios that kind of all converged
Okay.
around 2000 or so, something like that.
So I saw the name like Westwood Pacific. Is that what it changed
Yeah,
from?
yeah.
Yeah.
Westwood Pacific was a name that it had for, I don't know, some number of months or maybe a year, because it was going from being purely Westwood to EA Pacific. So it was Westwood Pacific, then EA Pacific, and then EA. What was the studio was in Bel Air for a while, and then they moved to a new building that had been customized that was and then called it EALA, and it's been called EALA since then.
Okay.
Yeah. After working at EALA, I worked for another EA studio in Salt Lake, where I worked on The Sims and Tiger Woods Golf and various games for Hasbro. I worked at BioWare. I worked at Free Range Games, and a lot of other jobs in between that are games adjacent,
Okay.
like
I,
edutainment and design tools and things like that.
wow. Okay, yeah, so even more than I thought. I thought I saw like 15 titles, but you're saying way more. And are you still working on games and programming now, or
Yeah, like my latest project was at Free Range Games on a massive online skating game called Reckless, um, which is on Steam, or the early beta is still out on Steam. Um, where I was working on CCC, that's camera controls and character
okay,
for that. I worked at Telltale for a while, on the storybook style games. Anyhow, that's
yeah,
just a hodgepodge of different things over the many years
yeah,
since CNC.
okay, yeah, that's very interesting, very interesting. Um, yeah, what specifically then did you do on Generals and Zero Hour? That's probably most of my fan base or viewers will be wanting to know. I know you listed a few things
Yeah.
on Discord. I won't steal your thunder.
All right, I jotted down a list just trying to jog my memory. So let me try to think. The very first thing that I did when I was the new guy
Yeah.
was the Gatling cannon for the China faction. So that was the very first thing. Um, it was my first week on the job, and I did all the setup and all the connecting, the animation, the graphics, the sounds, the UI, everything. And then through a hideous blunder, I deleted all my work because I wasn't familiar with the source control
Oh wow.
system. So that was embarrassing for the new guy. And then I had to redo it all. There's an anecdote for you.
What was
All
that
right.
like a month's amount of work, or are we talking
No,
weeks or?
that was 1 week. That was the first
Okay.
5 days on the job.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had Chris Mornis was coaching me during that week. Um, yeah. Chris was the new guy until I showed up, and so I like deposed him as the new guy. And so it kind of fell to him to show me the ropes on everything.
Okay.
Um, so what did I make on Generals and Zero Hour? I did the building capture system, I did the spy satellite, did the radar van, did the angry mob, I did I re-engineered the particle system, um, including adding the ability to draw streaks, which is used for trails and exhaust for jets and missiles. I did the terrain distortion feature in the world builder. I added the stealth feature, which includes all the stealth ground units and the stealth fighter. Did the ambulance. I did all the laser effects and quite a bit of the laser weapon type innovation for the laser-based weapons. I did the microwave tank. I did the combat drop, which is where you can load Rangers into the Chinook and drop them into a garrison. I did the railroad. That was actually in the original Generals.
Mhm.
Um, I did animated destructibles, which is not really a unit, but it's just a feature that a lot of other things used. So it's the ability for an animated object to still emit particles from its moving parts. That was something that the engine didn't have until I added it. I did the Spectre Gunship. I did the EMP pulse um, weapon. I did the ion cannon, um, which Chris Mornis started that, and then he like got pulled onto, I think the either the motorcycles or the terrorist or something, and so he handed that off to me to finish. Um, so I did the Gatling cannon and all the Gatling weapons. I did the Emperor tank and the Overlord tank and all of its various upgrades. I did the nationalism and propaganda powers. I added a feature which is used on lots of units, which was the nested containers, and that might need some explanation. But and I did the Helix helicopter. That's everything I could think of before the meeting started. I'll explain what nested containers are. If you upgrade an Emperor tank with the bunker, which sits on top of the turret, and then you load that full of infantry, and then you drive the Emperor tank into a Helix helicopter and then fly it. So that's a container inside a container inside a container. But while all that's happening, all of their various AIs are operational. And so every little infantry unit that's in that bunker, that's in that tank, that's in that helicopter is scanning for targets and testing range and determining whether their reload time is ready. And all the damage that's incurred to the helicopter then has to be inherited by the tank that's inside it, which is then inherited by the bunker, which is then inherited by the infantry. And
Wow.
so that was kind of a mess, but the designers who had conceived all of those special China upgrades wanted it that way, and then little by little, it was, it was thought like, what if we could put the Emperor tank in the helicopter? And so that was like a last minute thing, and so now we have infantry AI that's operating inside of a structure, that's operating inside of a moving vehicle, that's operating inside of an aircraft. So that was it was extremely convoluted.
Yeah, and now you put it like that. Probably we as players, we just take it for granted these things kind of work, but now you put it like that. That sounds extremely complex.
Well, it's just something that the code base didn't anticipate until finally it did. And so like that had to touch like probably 30 or 40 different areas of code in order for that to work properly.
Okay. Um, I've got a few things to say now. Now you've mentioned all them units, it's got me excited.
Mhm.
There's so you worked also on the upgrades for the Overlord. So let's say you put a Gatling cannon on top of the Overlord, the Emperor Overlord as well. That's you as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the propaganda tower. I think
Yeah.
there was the three. There was the bunker, the Gatling, and the propaganda tower.
And since you also did the Gatling cannon in the first place, that was basically your work then going on top of the tank that you made the
Yes.
slot for.
Yeah, and there's some redundancy in the implementation and some shared code across it, so that the Gatling, with all the some of the tunings that can be had by the Gatling cannon are inherited, therefore, to the Gatling upgrade as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the Gatling cannon is a really cool building. I don't think it has any bugs or anything. I think it works perfectly. That there is one weird bug that is extremely rare. I've seen it once in like 20 years of playing the game, which is that there was an Emperor tank that got sniped by the Jean Kell, so it had no pilot or driver inside of it. So it became like civilian.
Okay,
And then a GLA worker ran to steal it. So normally it would then go to the enemy faction. It would go to the GLA faction, but
right.
the worker actually became where the Gatling cannon should have been. So and it was just stood there with its arms out. I can send you the video later, but it's extremely rare. But it's like one of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Okay. So there, I don't know. I could theorize what's happening there if you want to hear all the techno
Yeah,
babble, but yeah,
if you know it, go ahead. Yeah, yeah,
well, I mean, so for the GLA worker to inhabit a vehicle requires that it enter its container as the driver. So, like under what we'd consider maybe more orthodox conditions, like the Humvee, the driver is one of the infantry that are contained, within and have the ability to fire from the moving vehicle. But the worker probably was marked with a type because there in the Sage engine there's a kind of classification where you can say what kind of a thing are you, and then it's like a list of things that you like boxes that you tick. And so It might have been that it was kind of late in the development cycle that driver was a kind of that was assigned to the GLA worker so that he could steal things, steal vehicles, and become a pilot. And it might be that there was an inadequate filter on the Emperor tank's container that allowed it to contain drivers.
Okay.
Um, but the container for the tank is very specifically puts the what's called the drawable, that's the visualization of the unit, on top of the rotating turret at the top. And so that's probably why you get the worker sitting on the turret, because the code just blindly said, well, he's the right kind to put in my main container, and therefore he must be drawn. And so he was, and I wonder, was he drawn animated or in his T pose? Because the,
Just in a T pose, yeah, fixed. It looked
yeah,
hilarious.
well, yeah. Well, so that's my internal forensic
Yeah.
analysis of it. And probably like Chris or Graham would probably be going like, yeah, that's plausible.
So some of the other things you said, like the streaks from jets and things like that, and particles. I think inside Zero Hour, there's like certain particle effects that some of the people in coding would say are like expensive on the system, and like you have a lot of it, and very quickly your FPS, even if you've got an amazing computer, your FPS can drop very, very quickly. There's certain particles in the world builder where if you like place like 10 of them, for example, your FPS will just go down for no apparent reason. Is there any like explanation you could give on that? Like, or do you think that's like fixable now we have the source code by the community, for example?
Well, I think that if modern shaders were replaced the shaders that Mark Wilczynski made, Mark Wilczynski was our rendering engineer, and he was dealing with the shader model of the time, which is, decades old now. And so for that, for those shaders to be ported to modern video cards directly is not going to exploit any of the hardware. Whereas if a modern shader that's using modern shader libraries, I bet the rendering, things like the fill rate and the transform and things like that would be perhaps hundreds of times more efficient.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
one thing. Another is that there's three or four different classes of particles in the Sage engine, and one is just your usual quad camera facing, billboard particle. But then there's other ones called decals, which are rendered to the terrain. So, for example, if you were to poison or irradiate, using the toxin or the radiation powers, and you see that the effect is spreading across the terrain, that's done with a decal. So decals are extremely expensive because you have to generate new draw calls for the terrain data that which then have the projection of the decal texture on them. Um, and we use those very liberally in the game because they looked really cool. But it might be under those conditions that it's slowing down. And if any engineers who are working on optimization are listening, maybe just take that as a high level direction to re-engineer the decal feature, perhaps even from scratch inside the game engine device terrain draw
Okay.
code. Or, or
That
or have those people ask me. I can probably direct them to where that code is.
that's a very good point actually, because people who are looking through the source code now and trying to create like a community made update or patch, they probably will be watching this. In fact, they definitely will. So
Yeah.
those little tips are really handy actually.
Yeah, look for a W3D terrain draw. You'll
Okay.
you'll see the reference to the decal draw operations.
Yeah.
Um, there's also another thing that I added, which was the blur. Um, it's a special particle that draws that uses its location on the destination graphics buffer as a texture, and then reorients the UV coordinates so that it distorts. and then it draws that transparently. And so that's used for the microwave tank. It's used for all of the different things that make heat effects, including some of the nuke effects. Um, and that's expensive too because we have to reset the draw context to use the display as a texture. So we have to take the display, copy it to a buffer, and then render the particles using that buffer as the texture. So it's another thing that probably could be easily optimized.
That is a really cool effect, actually. The microwave tank with the heat effect. It
Yeah.
looks really, really decent for 2003 as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
It was well, from my perspective, it was a new invention. I mean, that I'm not to say that other people didn't have the same idea, but um, yeah, Mark Volchinsky and I were collaborated on that, and I was pretty proud of it.
yeah. I actually now most of us have the heat effects turned off because we figured out if we go into the NVIDIA control panel from your desktop, you can set things like anti-aliasing to 16 times and various other settings, and it makes all of your edges inside the game much more crisp, and you don't have that diagonal like zigzag on the edges. It makes it way more
Hmm.
crisp. But the thing is, when you do all of that and you look at a microwave tank with the heat effect on, your screen goes black. I don't know why that happens, but we figured out it's easier to and better overall to turn off the heat effect and have these NVIDIA settings. So we've got all these everything looks real crisp.
I think that that's another thing that could be addressed with just having a modern graphics specialist looking at the
Yeah,
low level code in the W3D WW3D. That's the Westwood graphics library that was part of the Sage engine.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, in fact, maybe all of that needs to just be replaced with something modern. The fact that the old code will compile and run, and that the shader model is reverse, is backwards compatible on modern video cards, is a happy thing for getting the game to compile and run, but it isn't really suitable because it doesn't exploit the modern hardware.
Mhm.
Um, Anyhow,
Okay.
that's where that is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the dream for us will be that gets updated. We have the heat effects back, and we keep the crisp edges too. That's the dream. So yeah, we'll see where the guys get.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of some of the other things you just read out. So things like the nationalism upgrade, I think you mentioned.
Mhm.
Are they upgrades like that, like a more simple thing to implement than like a Gatling cannon, for example?
Well, yeah, it's completely different. It is that was rather simple because we have a precedent for area buffs. Um, an area buff is just where you have an object that pings the what's called the partition manager. I'm trying to think in the old code base. So it pings a let's say a circular region of the playfield, finds all the units, and then bequeaths a temporary buff on them, and that's how it's implemented. And so the propaganda tower will like ping like once every 2 seconds or something like that. And so everything that it finds within range, it just adds this little update, which causes you to have this buff added to your armor and to your weapon. It affects your reload. It affects the hits in your weapon. It affects it might even affect your locomotor. Um, but then for it's something that's also attached like to heroes. So like when you have Jarman Kell or Black Lotus or Colonel Burton, um, that all of the units that are within range of them are kind of said to be aware of being near him, and so they are filled with this nationalism, and so they get that buff too. And the same nationalism upgrade is affects all three factions in one way or another. They're just called different things in the story layer, but it's the same implementation.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so that's what that is.
Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah, I'm just trying to think of some of the other things you. quickly said, like the particle cannon. Then, so you said Chris started it. I think you finished it. Is that like the firing mechanism and the blue or pink laser that goes up?
Yeah, and then you steer it around so you burn what you want to burn you drive
Yeah.
it around through the camp. That and so that as with many of the other special powers, had kind of a long cook time between engineering and the design team because they'll conceive of the power and then we'll implement it the way that they spec it. And then the whole team plays the game and comes up with ideas to make it better or changes our mind about whether it's as cool as we thought it would be or and some things just morph quite a bit. And I think the ion cannon was one that it kept getting touched and touched again and touched again. Um, just because it's effectively a local area nuke that you can drive around in the in the enemy's base,
Okay.
um, just with different effects attached to it. Um, and ultimately, it got tuned so that you could, depending on which structure you're trying to burn down with it, I think, we ended up being like you could burn down two major and one minor structure before it expires if you drive it um, with optimal, efficiency. Um, and so that was a skill feature, that was desired that you, instead of just like dropping a giant reticle and then fire and forget, it's one that you had to babysit, right?
Yeah.
So you'd fire it and then it would go, and the beam would come down, and then you had to go burn this, no, burn that, burn that. Kind of like a drone pilot would have to be,
Hmm.
um, you know, actually paying attention to what they're doing.
Hmm. So like on the particle cannon, I think Chris said you would get like a mini brief, like I don't know, like a Pokemon card or whatever, a brief card, and it would say what the game designer would want on there. So for the particle cannon, or the ion cannon, as you call it, would it have said on there, we want it to destroy 2 buildings and a half, and or did you come up with that as you were doing it?
The 2.5 buildings thing would have been something that, well, in this case, I think it was either Jason Bender or Greg Black, which were some of our senior designers. I don't remember which. Sorry, guys. It was one of the two of you. And what was something that we settled on as being the right balance for the power. Because, I mean, one of the most important things to know about making an RTS and about making an RTS in the Sage engine is how much time and attention it takes to balance the units and balance the factions. Um, and that's a process of implementing the unit or the structure or the power, getting it into the product, and then getting the whole team to play it every day again and again and again. And for the designers, especially the ones whose responsibility it is for tuning, are monitoring how people feel about it, what the outcomes are, statistically, and then tweaking. It's something as simple as tweaking a hit point is often how you balance the units, but sometimes it requires actually popping the hood and changing the implementation. And for the ion cannon, that kept having to touch the code because we needed to change its behavior to make it feel right and to feel fair. The China has little and big nukes and unit-driven nukes and superpower nukes, and the GLA had the Scud Storm and the toxin powers and things like that. And then the US had, well, they had the EMP and the ion cannon were its analogs to those, but they're asymmetrical. They don't behave exactly like each other. So it's not just a matter of saying like all three factions get this thing and it's just reskinned to look like that one's Chinese and this one is US. These were the analogs to each other's within the faction, but they are not like each other. And so all of those took a lot of massaging and tweaking for the balance to feel right.
Okay. So were you also involved in that, in playing games? And if you noticed, I don't know, that the China tank was too weak, for example, you would give that feedback, or the designers would be watching you anyway. So your feedback towards the balance would be taken on board too.
My feedback is worth as much as anyone else's, but we had a team, like an on-site team that would play the game every day, in skirmishes and in tournaments. Um, and I don't know, real hardcore players like Chris would have a whole lot more input than I would because I'm not a hardcore player like him. Um, in fact, there's an anecdote story that I'd like to share about
Yeah, please do.
that later. So the designers would be involved, hands-on involved in playing it too, and everyone and paying attention to just the gradual trend of the shifting balance between the factions and their powers and their units, and looking for exploits, and making sure to mitigate those exploits so that it doesn't feel unfair. Some of those tuning defects and exploits make it into the product, and one of the things about Generals in Zero Hour is that I was part of the hit squad where after we had shipped it, um, we were responding to the playing community, because then the number of players who are experiencing that balance factor, multiplies by many thousands, and we get that feedback. And so, making those tweaks, in hand with the design and feedback to mitigate that. And there were quite a few of those that got put into the product after, um, so and that in order to inherit the fixes, of course, the user had to download a patch.
Mhm.
And so it's
Okay.
it's it's not like today where the product is just considered live and it updates itself. The player had to deliberately go in and install the patch. Um,
um, so on the China tank, the Emperor Overlord's like the biggest tank. There's a
mhm.
bug in the game where the speaker tower comes naturally on it. It has it on it as default. But then when you upgrade the subliminal messaging, which makes the speaker tower 25% bigger, it doesn't work on the
And
tank. Because apparently there's a spelling mistake in the code. But there was always a theory: was that actually a typo, or did someone mistype it on purpose to quickly get it out of the game for balance? I don't know if that's even realistic.
I'm not aware of what that issue is, but I doubt that a spelling mistake
Okay.
can exist because everything was enumerations. Um, I don't know. It might have been if it was something that was data driven. We have these INI files, INI files, which is like back in that era's equivalent to say XML or JSON, formatted data, and that's a lot can be done by just tweaking those files. But that is the only place where a spelling mistake might apply, where like you list the kind ofs, and if you misspelled it there, then the any parser would discard that token, and
Okay.
maybe it was an important token. So if that's the case, that's not misspelled in code. That would be misspelled in data.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know where exactly it was. I'm sure someone will probably comment on this video and tell us. Um, any of the other things you worked on that of in like maybe interesting when you worked on them? I suppose like the radar van you said, quite a straightforward
Yeah.
unit.
Well, the unit itself is straightforward, but the ability um, to have a static region of erased shroud it was the feature, and that was an
Yeah.
in-depth implementation.
Okay.
And it's the same with the spy satellite power for the US faction. It does exactly the same thing. So it drops an unseen object there that deshrouds at a radius for as long as it is intended to exist there and survive. The case with the spy satellite is that you would drop it in and then it would just stay in the level for as long as you had power to run it, enough power plants to run it. Whereas the radar van was local to the van. So you could move your little peekaboo circle around wherever you drove it. Um, and that required uh, reallocating the shroud state of every grid square in the shroud every time the van moved. And so that's actually a little bit of an expensive thing to do. But so if you were GLA and you built a fleet of radar vans, you would slow the game down from the logic layer doing that. Um,
Okay.
there would be ways to optimize that now that I think about it, but that was every van would be repainting the entire shroud every time it moved.
Wow. There's me thinking it's
Um,
just a simple little radar van, and this is the interesting stuff. We find out it's actually far more
yeah.
complex than we think.
Well, yeah, I mean the fog of war slash shroud feature. I mean you know the game really well. You know that you get that the world is blacked out until it's visited, and then it becomes shrouded, and then the shroud can be revealed, and so then there's a revealed state, and then revealed will revert to shrouded
Yeah.
if you vacate. And so it's that toggling of every grid square between revealed and shrouded that we're talking about. Um, the Helix helicopter is fun to implement. It's actually it's one of the quirks of balance in the game because it's extremely capable. You can put an overlord tank in it and fly that tank around. Um, And the infantry that are in the bunker that are on the tank can fire from the flying helicopter. And it's got a lot of capabilities, but it's so brittle I think just with like one bazooka shot to it, and the thing is careening to the ground. Um, and I kind of remember that it was Greg Black, he's one of our senior designers, um, that he was responsible for the tuning of that unit. And he said he wanted that extreme disparity of having this ultra heavy lift, high capacity, bristling with armaments unit that can be taken out by a single infantry. And so it's so brittle and so vulnerable. And that one always felt weird to me because of that extremeness. Um,
Okay.
Let me tell you the story. Okay, I told you that the whole team would gather in the auditorium and play our tournaments, so head-to-head tournaments on the giant screen that we had in our big auditorium there at EALA. And we would set up the tournament elimination tree, you know, so which was I think was randomly chosen, and I found that like in one of the play tiers that I was set against Chris, which is really bad because Chris is well, he he is the most mentally energetic, sharp, quick thinking, competitive, and nasty person on the team. And I worked side by side with him, and we were close friends, but like his personality and mine were quite opposites. And so I, in contrast, am the most sluggish, um, like non-twitch gameplay. You know, if the game is being played at a slow pace, I enjoy it. But if I'm going head to head with somebody who's trying to slaughter me, that's just going to lead to nothing but embarrassment. And so I decided that since he was going to slaughter me in front of the whole company on the big screen, in some spectacular fashion, that I would in turn that I would lose the game spectacularly. So while he was building up all of his war factories and his powers and building and upgrading all of his units, you know, to perfection, I was just building supply trucks. Supply truck, supply truck, supply truck, supply truck. And I did what was known for a long time as the supply truck rush, which is where I just rushed his base with 300 supply trucks. You know, which, as everyone knows, has no armaments and is so. But I did clog up his base, which frustrated him because he couldn't maneuver, and he was surrounded. But you know, so it took him like 3 minutes of firing to finally murder me. But I was just laughing and laughing the whole time, the whole. So I got the moral victory by robbing him of his actual victory.
The supply truck rush.
Yeah.
I'll have to remember that one.
Yeah, yeah. If you know you're going to be slaughtered, just, go out in a blaze of glory.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's cool.
Oh, the Spectre gunship was completely implemented from scratch. There was
Okay.
there was nothing in the product that supported anything about that at all. And so that was a fun one to implement because it kind of it borrowed almost nothing. You'd think that it would borrow like from other aircraft or from the delivery plane or from something like that, but only in concept, because the implementation was completely unique. It's a power that generates a unit that has an autonomous behavior, right? And kind of like the ion cannon, you can kind of babysit what its behavior is going to do. Most people don't. And I find like when I watch YouTube videos of people playing Zero Hour, they'll just drop the Spectre and then fire and forget. And I'm going like, no, I worked a whole week on making you pick targets. And because that's the essential thing about a Spectre gunship is the ability to pew pew specific things.
Sure.
But if you don't, it'll just pick its own target, which
Hmm.
that's all it does. Anyhow, so
Yeah.
that was a lot of coding attention to something that ended up not being like a star in the game, and that was kind of disappointing too. It's also weird that a real Spectre gunship in real life is
Hmm.
a AC-130 that's converted with all the cannons coming out the side of it. But in Zero Hour, it was this plane that doesn't exist, and I'm not sure why that was. I would have liked it better if it looked like the real one.
Yeah. I do think that's one of the reasons why Zero Hour is so popular is because you can resonate. Like a Humvee is one of the most common used vehicles in the U.S. Army. F-22 Raptor, all of these things you can kind of. It's not the most realistic game in the world, but at least you can resonate with the realistic units and models. I think that's one of the
Yeah,
reasons.
yeah. Especially recently, as in the news, you see there's these tunnel networks in Gaza, and we had tunnel networks 20 some years ago, and I wonder whether they got the idea from our game. But
Yeah, possibly.
I'm not aware that large scale tunnel network tactics were ever employed until the last couple of years, but it was in our game.
Yeah, I don't know about like the invasion of Iraq. I don't know if they had tunnels. If we knew if the West knew about them in advance, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember that the Iraqi Air Force would bury their fighter jets in sand, which was I thought was like, well, what a mean thing to do to a fighter jet.
Wow.
But they did that to hide them.
Yeah. Did
Imagine
you
the,
hear?
the the cleaning job after that, though.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Did you hear what Chris said that there was conspiracy theories that Generals in Zero Hour was sponsored by the MOD, the Ministry of Defense?
Um, that's an interesting conspiracy. Well, some conspiracies are real, but I don't think that one
Mm.
is.
Yeah. But it's kind of predicted like the rise of China very well. Like I see YouTube videos all over the place saying China's the up and coming, wants to be the world's superpower kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and the asymmetry of the strategic outlook of the West and of China
Yeah.
and of um, paramilitary groups, all of those asymmetries are still found at play, in the actual strategic theaters of the world right now. So that's something to be proud of too, because you know so much of the our three factions, the GLA, the USA, the China, are asymmetrical but analogous, meaning that there's a foil to everything on another faction, and there's a way of foiling the other faction.
Mhm.
Um, and it's so beautifully balanced because we balanced that thing for months and months and months, specifically with generals with Zero Hour. Chris and I and the other engineers involved had to implement all of these features really quick because that too needed time to balance. And in that case, we were balancing the various generals, balancing the AI players as they chose the different generals, and balance the new units, the new powers, all of that. Uh, I'd say that I don't know how many months we spent balancing it, but it it could have enjoyed a lot more time than we spent on it because Zero Hour was something that kind of had to go out the door the same year. And in generals, there was 2+ years of implement the first half and then balance the game for the second half.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know how many replays or games or if you've watched any Zero Hour at all of late, but a lot of people would say that if you just make some Humvees from the US and you load it full of missile defenders, the rocket guys, they just roam around and just destroy everything. They can quickly destroy buildings. They can detect stealth with the stealth drone, the UAV drone. They can kill infantry. They're just like the wreckers of. I don't want to say they wreck the game, but they're severely overpowered. People would say.
Yeah, yeah, and there's other things like that. If you can build enough Emperor tanks or Overlord tanks, this is going back to the original generals. Um, Overlord tanks have a disadvantage because they're slow and lumbering, and the firepower is concentrated on them instead of diffused. But if you can generate enough of them, they're unstoppable
Mhm.
against any ground force. And that's the kind of thing that another key aspect of the balance is the production rate and the upgrade rate so that you can get your upgrades and gain veterancy. And how fast can you gain the veterancy? That you know what veterancy is, but for those who might not know, that means that if your unit can experience battle and survive it, they come away stronger. And so the rate at which that is earned is another tunable thing. But if you get like fully upgraded and fully veteran and fully um, propagandized
Yeah,
overlord tanks, that's an unstoppable force too. And the only thing that'll take it out would be, ion cannons or something.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
but
think you're
like
right.
your Humvee example is one is you could consider that an exploit, an early exploit though, because you can just make a war factory and a barracks, and you can start creating those exploits and like pack the Humvees with missile men and off they go, right?
Mhm.
Um, and it's quick to train a missile man and quick to build a Humvee too. So like that's a very, very early exploit.
Yeah, I think even if let's say the Humvee wasn't able to build like the UAV drone, so it couldn't detect stealth as well. Like if you just take that one thing away, at least it would balance it a bit. Because if it can
Or push it
detect,
to later. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Push it that it's like it's only available on a veteran unit or something. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, or unlocked from a certain building or something, yeah.
right.
I mean, this goes without saying. If you had another 12 months of just balancing that game 0 hour, without a
Yes.
doubt, there was more changes you probably wanted to make. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were changes that we made after it shipped. But eventually everyone who could contribute to all that balancing effort was diverted to other, because for example, I was put onto Battle for Middle-earth 1 while it felt like there were still things to do on Zero Hour. But you got to move on to the next project.
Okay. So from the list of things that you worked on, I understand you were a developer or a programmer. So generally, you're given a set card or whatever to make this work or make it happen. But was there anything that you yourself came up with and the EA took on board? Like Chris Mornis said, for example, that he came up with the idea of workers' shoes and subsequently that got implemented. Was there anything you had like that?
Um, the ability um, to nurse the targeting reticle for the Spectre and for the EMP. No, not the EMP, the iron cannon. That
Okay.
was my I don't want to claim that it was my original idea, but it wasn't in the first spec, and it was one that I championed. And one special power that a programmer has is that they can demonstrate their idea live. And so I implemented it and then got permission.
Okay.
Um, the There were a lot of those kinds of things on the Battle for Middle-earth games that followed, where it was my initiative. Uh, okay, one thing, and I think it might be present in Zero Hour, but if I'm mistaken, then it is a Middle-earth feature, and that
Mhm.
was the lasso. Um, you can use the mouse to marquee select the units in the field, and you can add and subtract using the modifier keys. But I added another key that allows you to do a random shape lasso, and almost nobody knows that it exists. That was one that I just wanted, and so I implemented it one afternoon and then told people about it much later.
I've seen
Um,
that in other games. I'm not aware of it in Zero Hour, so maybe that was Battle for Middle Earth. Unless you're telling me there's a secret that I don't know about, then that would be very
Well,
interesting.
yeah, I'm sure it's not documented, but there's some combination of keys that like control shift while dragging, that will, instead of making the rectangular marquee, will make a random lasso.
Yeah.
And that's handy because you want, like, I want this whole crowd of units, but not you. And so you just draw,
Yeah.
exclude him from the shape. Whereas the other way of doing that is to, like, okay, take everybody and then like minus you, minus you, minus you, minus you.
Takes a while. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a little bit less
Okay.
housekeeping and babysitting. Um, I improved the world builder features for the level design guys, which was kind of things that I kind of did on the fly without it being on my, I didn't have a ticket for it, but I would just improve the world builder for the level designer guys, because their job was really, really hard. That tool is clunky and slow and cryptic, and so
Hmm.
a lot of what made that tool better was my initiative.
Okay.
Um, Including the ability to sculpt terrain, because when I got there, the terrain feature just had up and down, terrain up, terrain down, and so I added features that allow you to make slopes and plains and plateaus and ramps and things like that. Yeah, I don't know. There's probably more answers to you, but I just can't think good. I'm sorry.
Maybe that'll come up in the next few questions.
Maybe.
So, did you enjoy working in the EA? I think EALS team. Yeah, that's what Chris Morris said. It was one of like the best teams he'd worked for. Was that the same for you, or?
Yeah, that's a time when I felt like I was the most privileged to be working on that team and that project and the most connected to my audience. Um, because I was a fan of the game before I got on the team.
Okay.
So that's like an ideal thing for somebody in my industry. It's kind of a dream.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, if I look back to like all the projects I worked on, I would say that Generals in Zero Hour and the Middle Earth games were my favorite, and
Okay.
where I was most vibing with. I learned the most while there. I did a lot of my best work there. I felt good about it. It was well received by the gaming public. Everything kind of just clicked.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really really cool. Really good to hear. And do you still keep in touch with anyone from that team? Obviously, I know you must speak to Chris because I think he's put me in touch with you. But
Actually, Chris complains that I don't connect with him enough.
oh, really?
Um, Well, I mean, I talk to him on LinkedIn every time I lose my job and say like, "Hey, do you know anyone who's hiring?" And he
Okay,
says,
fair
"Well,
enough.
um, there's okay, one of the engineers on the team, Scott Bowen, I stayed kind of connected to him a bit for years afterward. There's some producers and designers on the team who I'm cordial and friendly with, just as, like sharing stuff that's happening in the industry. Um, like, yeah, I mean, it's sad. I moved away uh, it was 2005. I moved from California to Utah. And so with that, I just like lost a bunch of friends all at once. So,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. So yeah, you worked on Battle for Middle Earth 1 and 2. I mean,
mhm.
most of my viewers who are watching this will definitely be interested in Zero Hour, but there might be a few people that are also into that. Could you describe maybe briefly a couple of things or a few of the main things that you did on those games?
Sure. Um, well, Battle for Middle Earth 1 was rushed out, and a lot of the features that it was supposed to have, it didn't, which was really sad. Like you could only build your structures on prescribed build pads that the designer placed. And that was super sad because part of the core tactics of an RTS is deciding where you want your base and how you form it and that kind of a thing. And so on Battle for Middle Earth 2, they said, Mark, we need, custom base building and we want a castle system so where you can build walls and turrets and drawbridges and gates and portals. And and we want the walls to be protective and destructible, and we want some of the enemy units to be able to breach them and others not. And so I did that whole nest of features where you can stretch out walls, spans of walls that are connected between um, towers and upgrade the towers and walls and things. And I also made it so that some units like goblins and giant spiders and things like that can crawl up over the walls and attack you inside your base and that kind of thing. Another such thing was flying beasts. So the eagles and the fell beasts, which are the flying Nazgul. I introduced that as a feature completely from scratch. So it's the ability for the unit to fly, to hover, to swoop down and attack things, swoop down, pick ground units up from the ground, take them in airborne and drop them, um, and to engage with each other in hand-to-hand dogfights while flying, and to not fly through each other while they go around in the world. And I was kind of proud of that. I usually am awful at estimating the amount of time a feature is going to take, but on that one they said how long would it take from scratch to get from nothing to eagles and fell beasts? I said 24 days, and
Wow.
it took 24 days. And I keep telling that story because it's the only time I ever rang that bell.
So am I right in saying you would have learned loads of skills and loads of experience from building generals and Zero Hour? So probably you put those skills to use and you were better at estimating when you came to Battle for Middle Earth.
Yes, yeah. And,
Yeah.
and by that time, I was one of the only remaining devs from the Generals and Zero Hour team that was left. I mean, we had Chris for a while, although I think he was working on other projects too. And then and Graham and John Ahlquist and pretty much everyone else on the team was a new guy
Okay.
by the time we were working on well, what I call a new guy, somebody who wasn't there for generals is what I mean. Um, but yeah, I mean it's all based on the same code base. We had a technical designer named John Combs who was an absolute superstar, and he had prototyped the Battle for Middle Earth game by himself by taking Zero Hour and renaming everything. So like this is a cavalry and that is a battering ram, and so he's just taking tanks and jeeps and motorcycles and things from Zero Hour, and as for as much as was possible, reskinning it or modding that into an early Lord of the Rings proof of concept. And that both sold the concept, both internally for EA and with our external partners. But it was something that the whole team was able to pick up and play and say, like, hey, look, we're playing Lord of the Rings. It all looks like tanks and motorcycles, but it's Lord of the Rings. And then, so the work was then to make it look like Lord of the Rings, which was a lot of work because that's very highly specific style. But then to implement things like actual cavalry and actual dragons and actual castles and things.
Mhm.
But that was a stroke of genius where he was able to mod Zero Hour into a Lord of the Rings game initially.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Probably a lot of people don't realize that, but it's really really interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, those Lord of the Rings game and the CnC 3 game in the various CnC games that followed the Lord of the Rings games, they're all built on top of that same code base, the Sage engine. We call it the Sage engine, but really it's generals, and then we add to that, and then it's Zero Hour, and then we add to that, and then it's Lord of the Rings, and then we add to that, and then it's CnC 3.
Okay.
Um, so everyone who works on the game is working on the engine, and so the engine just becomes more robust, more performant, more full-featured because the new game requires that expansion to the engine to where now the engine is, I mean, it's packed with features, including some that are very esoteric and specific to Zero Hour or to Lord of the Rings, and some that are just universally extensible. And for modders, that has to be just really fertile ground because you can make whatever infantry, whatever vehicle, whatever production or garrison type structure that you want, because we have all of the what in the engine are called modules, but they're essentially components like you would have in Unreal or Unity that are just ready to go out the door and fully featured. And the people who are taking the Sage engine and messing around with it now have already experienced that there's some things that are just the rudiments of every RTS, and they're already there. And then there's a bunch of stuff that's very, very weird and specific, like a tunnel network. Well, maybe that's generic by now. Anyhow, it's all in there. And
Mhm.
the code base is, well, by modern standards, it's actually pretty compact, but at the time it was gigantic. Uh, and compiling the game source code took hours when I first started, which was a development strategy. Is like when you made your changes to your code, you could, Visual Studio would tell you whether you have a compile error in the file that you're working on, but you had no idea whether the game would build until you set it building. And then that was a time where, like, well, I'm going to come back tomorrow and see if it worked.
Mhm.
Um, Whereas now, there's nothing like that facing any developers anymore. You have minutes at most
Yeah.
to do a full build.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of like now that you put it like that, that everything the Sage engine is generals and everything's built on that. It feels kind of weird that I'm just playing like the most original, basic, oldest version. Like I could be playing a much later version, like the CnC 3 and Kane's Wrath, that has way better graphics, but it's a completely different game. There's no other game like Generals and Zero Hour, and all of my viewers will back me up on that. Where, like I said before, the units resemble real life units like the Humvee and the Raptor. Okay, the ion cannon is a bit weird and wacky.
A
Maybe in
bit
the future we'll
sci-fi,
have it.
yeah.
But like the nuke and the China, and the fact that you can just send a worker or a dozer and build anywhere. The other games are not like that, and those are the reasons why a lot of people gravitate still to this game. Um, yeah, even though it's the
Yeah,
oldest.
yeah. I love those features too. The sandboxier the RTS, the better for in my taste.
Mhm.
and what we made is very, very sandboxy.
How did you first get into game development in the first place? Like, did you study at university? Did you always want to be get into it, or how did
Um,
that begin?
I'm a programming autodidact. That means I taught myself. The
Wow,
I was programming games on the early Commodore machines. That's the VIC-20 and the 64, back when those were relevant, and I was doing that solo in my bedroom as a teenager.
that's
And
amazing. I did not
and
expect that.
I published my games on bulletin board services for free. And I kind of had to give that up for a little while to do 4 years of college. And then when I came out of college with an art degree, then I tried various jobs and then lucked out in being able to get a job at Sega doing backgrounds. Um, and a lot of what I had learned about how to make computers do stuff was translated well even into that job. Um, there was a time, this is when had formed a company called the Neverhood, and we had a team of 8 in a mixture of programmers and artists, and we had made one game, and then we wanted to make a second one, which was on a different platform and of a different genre, and so we needed a different number of artists and programmers. And I said, well, I'll switch from artist to programmer. Because that's the team lineup that we needed. And then I've just been primarily a coder since then.
Okay.
Was in That was in 1996.
So your college, when you went to college to study art,
Mhm.
art as in for games or art as in like paintings? What kind of art are we talking?
It was paintings. Yeah,
Okay.
there was no school that taught games back then.
Okay.
I went to college from 84 to 88. There was no there wasn't you couldn't even study computer graphics, at least not at the school I went to, because they didn't exist. I was the only one doing it
Okay.
um, in college. Um,
So you got the job at EA through your experience at Sega and originally through learning it in your bedroom.
yeah, I mean, by the time I got to EA, I considered myself to be an industry veteran because I had worked at Sega and Shiny and the Neverhood and Monkeytropolis, which is another a company that some friends and I formed, and we never managed to ship a single project, but we stayed in business for 4 years. But the
Oh, okay.
so I mean, with all with I had 9 or 10 games under my belt by then. I felt like I was a captain of industry already by then. And but the skills that I'd learned, like coding in C++, uh, on the PlayStation 1, translated to being able to work on the CNC projects.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I thought you were going to say you studied at university for 8 years. You got a computer science degree and in programming, but yeah, I'm wrong.
No, back then those things kind of didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and most of the people that like were peers in the industry, they were people who had taught themselves, or they had gotten a hold of an Amiga and learned how to do graphics, just as a pre-early adopter of those technologies. Just the nerdiest people, or the people who were hobbyists and enthusiasts, were the ones who knew anything about it, and nobody else did. And the people who wanted to have games made and pay to develop and publish them, they were out just looking for all the nerds. You know, somebody who knew more than nothing about how to do that work, and it was a select few people
Okay.
back then.
Um, with like the very quick development over the last couple of years of like AI, and I see more and more that AI is going to be able to do coding or already can do coding. How do you see that impacting jobs like yours or game creation in general? Do you see game development being much quicker, like assisting, or Do you see AI making whole games, or have you thought about
Um,
that?
there's a lot of bluster about AI making whole games, but it isn't real. I think that that may well be in our future, but it is not currently true. Um, when you see people who are promoting their latest AI and they say, "Look, I'm going to give it a prompt and say I want a game that is both Candy Crush and Tetris," and then like it churns on it, and then you can play it 10 minutes later. Like, okay, Candy Crush and Tetris, but that's that's pretty rudimentary. Um, but you couldn't say, for example, I want to play a game that feels like the natural next iteration of Call of Duty, but I want to have an ink gun like in um, Splatoon. You know,
Hmm.
it can't do that. It can't even begin to understand what you're talking about.
Okay.
So the but a human could. A human would hear that pitch and say like, "Oh yeah, I know exactly what I would need to do, and it's going to take this many people and this many months and this many millions of dollars."
Hmm.
Um, and so it's still true that it takes humans and it takes time and it takes money to
Yeah.
to 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 actually create and innovate and make something that's novel and interesting to the player. One thing that I see happening is that the developers can do what is now called vibe coding, which means that you have you have the AI next to you while you're coding, and you say like, "Oh, I forget what's the algorithm for a doubly linked list bubble sort," and so you just ask it like, "Hey, give me this," and I need it in Python, and I want it with the following commenting style, and so it'll go. You just
Okay.
drop it in. And then, three times out of five, it'll actually build and do what you expect, and the rest of the time it's lying to you.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. It's just burgeoning, but it is useful. Um, and I can, the AI is better than a search engine for finding answers to your development questions because it can do a deep search, and um, it can it's more efficient at typing out code than you are, and so you can have it save you time and labor by doing that. And it can remember things you forgot, and so it's good for that. And
Okay.
like let's say that there's some like theory of linear algebra that I just don't understand. Like I don't understand how I can compute a deflection using the cross product from an input vector. And so then you just ask the AI and like, oh yeah, thanks. That makes perfect sense because it knows it can go and read all the articles on the subject and tell you what they mean. That's where I think it's the most useful now.
Yeah.
There's a time in the future when you can just describe a game you'd like to play and then you're just playing it. But I don't know how long it will be until then. Maybe it's years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when that time comes, then the powerful people are going to be the ones making the AIs, and those of us who have the specialized skill to laboriously coax a computer into making an experience, might eventually be obsolete, but I don't think it's soon.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the same in a lot of industries. Even in my job now, we use AI to assist us. Sometimes it gets it wrong. A lot of the time, it does help us and assist us, but it can't yet fully do the job. I totally agree
Yeah.
of a human just yet. But yeah, we live in exciting and maybe scary times with how powerful that might get in the future. Have you seen the old Sage engine testing footage that they posted on the Command and Conquer YouTube channel? It was like the really
No,
old days from like 2002 or 2003.
I was around in 2002, 2003, so it's probably something that I've seen. But no, I don't know that I've seen any kind of repost of some vintage footage. That would be interesting to see. I do know that remember seeing the demo reel that was from the demo that where Generals was shown at E3. And in fact, that's how I got the job. Is I went to E3 and I saw the demo. I saw the producers demoing the game live at E3, and they said, "And we're hiring," and so I applied.
Okay.
Um, so are you talking about a scene where like a bunch of buggies come and blast a dam and then it floods a canyon or something like that?
Uh,
You're talking about something
that
else.
might be in it. It's basically I think it's like a 30-minute video. It's mixed with Renegade, like some cut Renegade scenes or something like
Right,
that.
right.
Um,
Yeah, Renegade
but
would have inherited some of the same code that Sage did from early Westwood titles and from there's actually code in the Sage engine from Dune 2, which is the original RTS. Um, so yeah, I mean, all of the games that came through the Westwood history have a lot of sharing and commonality
okay.
across.
So yeah, there's like some really old footage. It kind of, you can tell it's going to become generals, but it's like really early days. And there's some units there that I don't recognize, so they could well be from June 2. There's like some weird looking tanks and stuff like that. So
It's possible. Although Generals is a 3D rendering engine, and Dune was 2D. That was 2D sprites.
oh, okay.
Um, that was on the Sega Genesis.
Yeah, yeah, there was some weird looking tank. It might have been a mammoth tank in there as well. But yeah, things that weren't in generals, but they were clearly testing and building this Sage engine. Yeah, if
Yeah.
if you get a chance, check it out.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Um, I'll try to find it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Does it surprise you that they released the source code after all of these years? Because obviously they did the source code release. They made a new patch 1.05, which doesn't really do that much apart from enable like the Steam Workshop and adds a new little menu so you can play missions easily from the Steam Workshop, plus a few little fixes. But and they also did that video I just mentioned to you. That was kind of like the news in the release, but we were most excited about the source code. Did that surprise you? They did that.
I was surprised, pleasantly surprised. I've always had kind of a nostalgia for this uh, code base, I guess you'd say, because it was a place where I had learned so much. Um, and it was my first exposure to a lot of what are now considered standard coding patterns and practices were manifest in the Sage engine, the component model that all of the modern third-party game engines are based on. That was fully realized in our code base decades before. Um, and so, in a way, it's kind of a time capsule. And another way of looking at it is that it's kind of a toolkit for anyone who wants to roll their own engine, I suppose, or leverage the engine as it exists and find new ways of leveraging its core systems. I don't know whether anyone else is experiencing it, but to look at the Sage code and then compare it to modern game code, I think would be a very educational experience just to see how those ideas have evolved and what parts of the general's code base, which were mature, 20, 25 years ago, um, and which parts are still relevant and which parts have changed. And because if you can see that trajectory between the way things were 25 years ago, where the way they are now, and interpolate the journey between the two, then maybe you can extrapolate where things are going.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have a look through the source code and find any of your old comments or anything? You did, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I was a very prolific commenter. Um, I I mean, other than putting my name as the author on the top of a file that I had authored, but like I would be going in and fixing a bug, and then I would put a little 2-inch rant under it about like why it's such bad practice to do this, or how it was that this snuck by the testing process, and what are the tendrils of this bug. And so then I would always sign it with my initials MLO, which is M for Mark, LO for Lorenzen. Um,
Yeah.
and I only added the O to differentiate me from somebody else who had the ML initials. But the before long, everyone on the team started calling me MLO. And they probably still know me by that name. Like if you said, "Hey, Mark Lorenzen is being interviewed," like, "Who's that?" "It's Emlo." "Oh, yeah, yeah, Emlo." So,
Okay.
so it's a weird self or organically evolved nickname that stuck.
Mhm. Do you have any idea why EA would release the source code after so many years? Do you think it's like to try and boost sales, or a gift for the community, or do you think it's anything to do with the release, like of
Well,
Tempest Rising that just got released?
it's good for EA to have a gesture of goodwill, and so that's definitely a thing. Um, it, I don't know what the genesis of the idea was. Um, I bet if you could ask Jim Vasella, he would know because
Yeah,
he
yeah,
was probably part of that choice.
yeah. True.
Um, so I don't know what started the conversation, but there's a lot of reasons, or a lot of good justifications for why they did it. And it builds excitement. Um, it it probably is elevating awareness of the indie dev community and the gaming community about EA's earlier game libraries, which might be something that they're gonna be repackaging. That's just a guess.
What does that mean? Libraries, are they like all the models?
No, I mean like different product lines.
Okay,
Like I don't know, Medal of Honor games, for example.
okay,
They made a lot of Medal of Honor games and then stopped. So,
okay.
it'd be cool if we could, how you have like what was it called, the CnC the first decade or something like that, and you could
Yeah,
get Generals and Zero Hour and Red Alert and all of them all in one bundle.
yeah.
That would be cool if EA was going to be bundling like all of the cool stuff that they were making over the last 2 decades.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Medal of Honor. I remember that. I used to play that on the day of release. A few of those games. Yeah, they were really good.
Mhm.
So you basically think that the reason for EA releasing the source code is more of a gesture of goodwill and to highlight the indie developers.
I don't know, but it is a gesture of goodwill,
Yeah.
even if that wasn't the genesis of the idea. Um, because there's a lot of people who are have very happy things to talk about, um,
Mhm.
about having exposure to this source code. And um, I don't know, maybe it will be helpful to EA's recruitment efforts. I don't know. I can only conjecture along with everyone else what the reason was.
Yeah. It definitely helped in terms of like viewers on streams and the downloads on Steam. Uh, yeah, just general activity. I mean, the only reason I was speaking to Chris is because of that release. He found us on Discord, and then now I'm speaking to you. So it does create a lot of hype. So,
Yeah.
do you watch any Zero Hour streams or replays, or have you seen it recently, or even played it?
I do from time to time find somebody who's on Twitch or YouTube, of somebody who's doing their voiceover comedy shtick on top of the game that they're playing.
Yeah.
That's good entertainment. It has the same feel as back in the day when we would play and razz each other and nerd out about the way that this guy plays versus that guy. It- It's a new fun medium that didn't exist back then. You couldn't like just watch a stream of somebody playing Zero Hour. You had to actually be there in real life and watch it happen live. But now people can share that experience with thousands, and so it's fun to be the audience of that now.
Yeah.
And it kind of warms my heart when they're talking about, they say like, "Oh, I love this power," or "I love this unit," and they're like, "Yeah, that was me."
Yeah, I remember when I was little and when I was growing up, we had like it was a 56K modem and a dial up. You'd have to sit there wait for it to dial up, and then I'd be playing Counter Strike, and it would be the laggiest game ever. If I wanted to play at real speed, we'd go to a big LAN party where like 20 guys would get together and we'd swap like pirated stuff occasionally. Um, so yeah, it's changed a lot actually. Now you mention it, now that I can just play a game, boot up a stream, and sometimes during the finals we have like 2,500 live viewers watching two of the best players go head to head.
Yeah.
Does that surprise you? The fact that we can get so many viewers and so much sponsorship, because we have a lot of sponsorship too for
It,
Zero Hour in 2025.
I don't really know anything about the sponsorship, but I don't think it surprises me, but it's a pleasure to see that you can get that much interest and that much audience into people who want to play something that I worked on so many years back. Um, for me, it's the old days and it's nostalgia, but if it still has that kind of relevance, meaning that I was part of making an experience that still has value, and so that feels really good.
That's
Um,
cool.
I mean that's the single thing that motivates me to stay in this industry is I want to make experiences and for the people who experience that to maybe feed back to me like how that felt.
Yeah.
Um, that's that's why I'm still at it.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really cool to hear. Really, really nice to hear. Um, just comparing that to any other games that I think you said you worked on like 33 games or so. Out of all of those games, which is like your biggest today that people still actively play? Uh, would you say? Do you know?
Um, I wasn't a coder on The Sims, but I was an engineering team lead on an intermediate uh, effort in The Sims 3 to port it to consoles. So that's certainly the kind of an anchor, meaning if somebody just standing in the grocery line says, "Hey, what games did you work on?" I would say, "Well, have you heard of The Sims?"
Yeah,
And they go, "Oh yeah, I have a niece who's addicted to that."
super popular.
Um,
I used to be addicted to that way back.
yeah. So I mean that of all the games I've worked on, I mean if you rewind all the way back to Earthworm Jim or Vector Man, like in their day, those were huge, immensely popular games. But um, I don't know, there are maybe vanishingly fewer people left who remember that. Um,
Which one was that? Sorry,
the Earthworm Jim or Vector
Earthworm
Man.
Jim.
I mean these were
I've
on
heard of
the
that.
Sega
Did I play
Genesis.
that? Earthworm Jim. Is it like Digging Jim or not?
Well,
No.
there's a
Uh,
digging level that I made for it, but it's just this cartoony game about a superhero worm in a super muscle suit.
Okay, yeah. There's a game called Digging Jim, which is it's just different. I used to play that. I think on the Amiga or something like that. The Amiga, way back. But yeah, Earthworm
I
Jim. I've never
don't know
seen
that.
that before actually.
Oh, well, see that demonstrates my point. It's like this. It's like it's a whole prior generation of fans.
Mhm.
I don't know. I wonder if I did the math. Like, how old is an Earthworm Jim fan now? 40, maybe 45.
So following the source code, there's a group of people now, as you maybe have seen, that are delving through that source code and they're trying to create like a community patch full of improvements, like maybe to the expensiveness of certain particles and fixing desyncs and all of that stuff. We're hoping within like 12 months or maybe 2 years, we'll have like an amazing game that like works perfectly because there's a few bugs like we've talked about.
Yeah.
Once we get that, do you see any like long-term future for Generals? Do you think we'll ever see a Generals 2 from EA, for example?
Well, was Zero Hour not Generals too? The sorry, that's
Could say that, yeah. Or
I mean, that was its working title, by the way.
oh, was it? It was Generals
Yeah.
2.
I mean, yeah, in-house for a few months until someone came up with a name. But
Yeah.
the so actual Generals sequel that is in that universe and leverages the same engine, and that would be supremely cool. I would want to work on that. The thing is, I would want to port the Sage engine to Unity first and then work on that because
Yeah.
that's gonna be that would be an easy transition, I think. And I don't know whether anyone is doing that, like making an Unreal or a Unity implementation of Sage. Um, but the
Um, I think I think EA released some rules or I don't know what you call it, the copyright thing, and it basically said that you're not allowed to do that. I don't know if
uh,
you're allowed to do it for a personal project, but definitely not allowed to do it for like commercial use. But yeah, I don't know
uh,
if you're physically able to.
well, if it's commercial, then there's powers that be
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
I can't affect. But the yeah, I mean, Sage was kind of at the peak of the strength of proprietary engine development, and the whole thing is implemented in C++, which is uh, various layers down to some proprietary libraries that are all implemented in C++, and then a very weak data driving layer on top of that. And so that set the stage for all modern game development that we have right now, including um, Unity and Unreal and Frostbite and CryEngine and everything else that you see, and all the things that they share in common, and that if you learn one, you can learn the other ones. All of that is you could say is learned from Sage, but what Sage doesn't have is uh, an editor environment where you can have the inspectors and see out everything that's running. You have to use a debugger for that. Um, so I mean that's why I had added my anecdote that I'd want to convert it to a modern development environment, just because the efficiency of that environment would allow new things to be made by smaller teams and faster.
Okay.
Because if we had those engines back in 2000, it wouldn't have taken as long and it would have taken fewer people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would it feel the same though if you ported it into Unreal Engine? Like, would it be the same game or would it? Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea about this topic,
But
but
that's a good question. And that kind of a theme has come up in the past about how there was a magic that was in the oldest of the old games, like back when solo coders were making the game in 6502 assembler, or back in the 70s and 80s. Like why how did those games feel like such miracles, whereas games built on the modern um, platforms feel so drab and lifeless? And that's kind of an ironic twist, because you're building on hardware that is feeble and capable of almost nothing, and in an environment that's so cryptic and so um, alien to human involvement, and that such magic came from that. And then now that we have Unreal Engine, there's so much boring crud. So I don't know I mean, I can philosophize about it, um, and
Yeah.
it might have something to do with laziness.
Hmm.
Um, but it's a real thing. There's magic from back when there were no easy engines that have has never been recaptured.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, the other game I can think of where people play the older version is like Age of Empires 2, where I've played Age of Empires 4 and the graphics and everything looks really cool. And to me, I'd just play, oh yeah, just play this one. But I see the player base for like Age of Empires 2, which the graphics look way worse, but people just all flock to that. I think it has like many times fold of more players than Age of Empires 4. But I don't know if that's the same story, but
Maybe
yeah,
there's I don't know. There's some kind of purity that comes from the simplicity, I think, too.
yeah,
Um, and maybe that forces some element of focus on the kind of experience that's made, is because you only have so much capability and so much energy to put into it that you end up synthesizing down to the purest good of the potential experience. Whereas if you have infinite capabilities and infinite resources, you just splatter that all over the like because it doesn't cost you anything.
yeah. Well, yeah, I wrote here. Do you have any funny stories from the time you worked on Generals and Zero Hour? You kind of already told me though. Your supply truck rush. Is there
The supply
anything
truck
else?
rush. Um, well, do you have any plans to interview Graham Smallwood by any chance?
I
Because
have him on Discord. There is a plan.
that
Yeah, it's
he
taken
would
a
be
while, but
a
yeah,
good next interview because you have Chris's perspective and now you have mine,
yeah.
and his would be like the next one on that
Okay.
list. Um, I like Chris and I like Graham a lot. They're
Yeah.
really, really fun to work with, and I learned a lot from them. Um,
Okay.
for a time, I sat across just like my cubicle and his were separated by a partition, and so I had to listen to all of Graham's um, outbursts and anecdotes and things like that. And it was more fun than playing generals was listening to Graham talk. He's just funny. Um,
Yeah.
so here's an anecdote story of like a bug that I fixed, and it was just a miracle. Like sometimes I'm convinced that I have a split personality and that the other one of me is really smart because um, but there was this desync bug in the product that was just days, I think, from going live, and it was a severe one. Like every time you would fire the artil fire one of the artillery units and then uh, scroll. No, you would fire your artillery unit while it was on screen for your opponent, and then
Oh.
they would move their camera away from it while it was firing. And those were the conditions. And so it's a real head scratcher. And so they brought it to the engineering team, which at that moment was just Graham and me sitting there in our cubicles. And so we like, okay, we're gonna jump on it. And so then like I could hear Graham and he was like plowing through code and looking for things. And I was just sitting there thinking, and and I managed to put it all together. And I told the story. I said, Graham, let's see if this makes sense. And I talked him through it. And
Yeah.
he says, you're an effing genius. And I said, I am, because I was right.
Okay.
And I'm not that smart, but the other me sometimes just like intervenes without me noticing and says something smart. Um, But I mean that I never felt better than I did on that day because I was able to find a bug that was in the code of the smartest guy on the team. And and I felt like I was maybe among the stupidest guys on the team, and I found that bug, and I did it intuitively, and 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 Graham just made me feel so good by what he had to say.
Yeah, I've only spoke to Graham a few times on Discord, but he already seems like an interesting character. Just like the use of his vocabulary and his sentences and stuff, I can tell
Yeah.
he's gonna be a funny guy. I can tell.
Yeah, he has a very peculiar way of phrasing things and quite a bit of bluster. Um, and I know I haven't talked to him in many years, but I'll bet he's still the same. Um, but yeah, his perspective would be it would finish the triangle, I think, after talking to Chris and then me.
Yeah.
I think Graham spent less time than Chris and I on Zero Hour, but he made a few contributions to it. Um, so that would
Okay.
be the third guy to talk to.
Hmm. Yeah, I'll make sure that happens. It sounds interesting. So you mentioned your story about desyncs. Now we're all too familiar in Zero Hour actually about it says in the game mismatches, so we call it mismatches, but desyncs, same thing, I think.
Yes. Hmm.
Yeah, sometimes you might be playing a 50-minute game and everything's running perfectly, and all of a sudden it seems like nothing's changed, but all of a sudden you just get a mismatch and the game just quits out, and there's no way you can ever replay that. So I briefly spoke to Chris about it, and he mentioned that obviously it's peer to peer, and when your PC is different to the enemies, then a mismatch can happen. But like, in your
Yeah.
opinion or your view, why, or could you explain to like newbies to this why that might happen after you're playing 50 minutes? Everything seems normal, but all of a sudden you just might get a mismatch. Why does that happen?
Well, the after 50 minutes thing, it could just be a matter of that the odds of encountering something that occurs at random increases the longer you play. Um, Although it could also be something that is leaking, and that's why if you're talking about a bug where it always happens after 50 minutes, then that's interesting information too, because
Mm,
that kind of tells the story about some kind of a state that evolves into a desynchronized mismatch over that much time, or perhaps something that is leaking. Leaking is in computer terms means that the um, memory is being spent and not reclaimed, and that can cause, perhaps a collection to grow to a size where the code that serializes it doesn't access the whole of the code anymore, perhaps, or something like that,
okay.
or exceeds a boundary of a buffer. I'm talking in coding terms here,
Yeah.
so um,
I think
maybe
I
the people
vaguely
who are.
understand what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. The peer-to-peer thing, it was out of necessity back in the day because the network performance wasn't up to the state where we could simply exchange the simulated state of the game to all of the peers, with some kind of server-side authority in the simulation. So, like Chris explained in his interview, all of the local clients are running the simulation synchronously and are sharing a stream of input that's common to all of the clients. So basically, all of your mouse clicks and keystrokes, um, and drag gestures and things are being serialized and sent across the network, to the host, which then distributes all of those events out to all the peers, and then all the peers react to that. And what is supposed to happen is that they react to it in exactly the same way. And thus, all the various simulations are doing exactly the same thing all the time. There's considerable overhead in developing that way because you have to make sure that um, what's considered logic side and client side concerns are separate from each other. And that was the one of the problems with that story I was telling is that if you move the camera off of your artillery unit, then it stops rendering its animated skeleton that pitches the barrel. And if it isn't animating the skeleton, then it goes and retrieves the pitch on the skeleton that was left the last time it was on camera, and then it shoots the projectile out from that point. And so the point is different, meaning that the shell gets launched from a different point for somebody who has the unit on their screen from it does for the somebody who had it on their screen but doesn't anymore. Um,
Okay.
And the solution to that was to stop examining the animated skeleton instead of, look at uh, some other thing that remains the same across all of the simulations. If I was going to try to solve the big problem of desyncs, I would depart from the peer-to-peer model completely, and I would just serialize the state of every unit in the simulation, and exchange that state across the network because we have the bandwidth to do that now.
Okay, so it would be like we'd all connect to a server, not peer to peer anymore. Did I
We
understand
could
that
still
right?
have it be peer-to-peer and have a host,
Okay,
but um, I would say that you'd want to have the host's simulation to be authoritative,
okay,
and for the remote peers to be non-authoritative. So they're all running in parallel, but the state from the host machine is being broadcast, and then each client is comparing to that state.
wow,
And
okay,
if it mismatches, then you just say, well, then I'll throw my state away and take the one from the host.
okay.
And because that's possible now, that's the solution. That's the easy blanket solution. And it also makes the game so much easier to implement new features.
That's really cool. I've never heard of that theory before. I always thought it was peer to peer, or you connect to a
Well,
server, and that's it.
it, in that case, the host machine is the server.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in Zero Hour, there is a server because the server is responsible for, like, remembering the leaderboard and matchmaking and all those kinds of things. So the server does exist. It's just that it's not involved in the simulation.
Mhm.
It matches peers together. One of them is chosen as the host, and then off they go. They play the game, and the results are then packaged up and sent back to the server that remembers the results. Um, we could keep that model too, because the host machine is already running the simulation, as are all of the peers. But we might as well just say, like, okay, the host machine is the authority, and it's going to serialize the whole game state and send it to all of the
Okay.
peers, and that the whole problem would go away.
And is that quite a simple thing to do in your opinion, in the
No,
grand scheme?
no, no.
No.
It would require somebody who has in-depth knowledge of engine and um, high-level implementations. Um, there's a system in the engine called the XFER, which is transfer abbreviated, which is a binary serialization solution for um, the game state. And so that's used to save and load the game. It's used to kind of take a quick imprint, it uses a CRC check on all of the XFER data to compare with the other clients to detect the desync. Because you have to, even though all of the clients are simulating independently and synchronously, you need to be able to know when that stops being true. And so the way that's done is by serializing all the state of everything and coming up with a little table of small integers, and then seeing whether that table matches the other peer's table. And if it doesn't, then the odd man out gets kicked out of the game, or everybody just gets a desync error, and, like, oh man, all the fun stops.
Yeah.
Um, but since we're doing that serialization step already, my thought is, well, let's just take the serialized data and put it in a packet and send it to all the other peers. And if a desync happens, then they can just consume that.
Mhm.
Um, it would take weeks to implement that, I think,
Okay.
for me having the in-depth understanding of how the engine works.
In a few weeks, you alone could do that.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, because all of that other code I was talking about, that's already there.
Yeah.
Um, and it's already doing its work. Uh, so there just need to be a layer that could consume the what is essentially a save file.
Mhm.
of the game. So there's this binary footprint of data that can be saved out and then loaded back in to restore the game state. Since that already works, then just save the game at runtime, send the save file out to all the other peers, and if they desync, then they just load. And now you
Okay.
aren't desynced anymore.
So obviously we have this group of voluntary developers, coders that are trawling through the source code and making improvements now. But
Mhm.
let's say we, the community, think it would be very valuable having you on board, and let's say we gathered enough money to pay you for 2 weeks, let's say, and work and help on the project. Is that something you'd be open to at all, or not?
Probably. Um, Assuming that there's no severe time constraints, because I work on various things. But yeah, I think that would be really fun.
Okay. Okay. Let me speak to the people who are working on it, because I think your input and your expertise could be very valuable. There's always people, private sponsors, throwing money around at Zero Hour. We have tournaments. This tournament this year is going to be over $20,000. So there's a lot of interest in Zero Hour at the minute. So leave that with me, and I'll come back to you.
Hmm.
Okay, here's a big one. So in Zero Hour, we have this thing where if you move in a diagonal line, you can move faster across the grids. Like I think 46% faster or something like that across the map. And there's a lot of talk about now the source code's out there. They want to fix this diagonal line thing and they want to standardize it. I guess you're nodding. This is something you're aware of. Was that something intended for Zero Hour, or was it not thought of at the time?
No, but I have a suspicion about what's behind it.
Okay.
Um, the the AI update module and its various subclasses are clients to a pathfinding service. It's a singleton class that you do a pathfinding request to it, and then you get put into a queue. And when it finishes running on its thread, it then sends you your path back. Um, Many of the AIs, in order to deal with the complexity of the changing condition of the playfield, meaning that structures are being built and destroyed and units are pathing in your way that weren't there when the path was computed. They have a refresh update rate that where the AI component will make it a certain distance from the last point where its path was computed, and then it will re-request the path from its current position. And then if the new path is smarter than the old one, which typically it would be, then it follows the new path, which will like dodge the structure that's in its way or dodge the fleet of tanks that are standing in the way or that kind of a thing. So what I think is happening with your diagonal is that a smaller number of you're traversing a smaller number of grid squares while moving diagonally than you are at an orthogonal direction. And therefore, you are repathing less frequently. And repathing less frequently allows you to move faster. That's my theory.
Okay.
Um, so if if you just had a drag race and you put like two Humvees in the corner of the map and you sent one straight up to the adjacent corner and the other one to the opposite corner, the one going to the opposite corner would arrive first, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the raw quick test. And so that would be a very quick proof environment to test my theory. That if the repath was scheduled not based on grid traversal increments, but on actual raw distance, then I'll bet they would synchronize.
Mhm.
That's my theory, and it would be really quick to test it. And if I'm wrong, then it'd be really quick to abandon that and move to the next theory. Um,
Yeah,
one
I don't
idea
know.
that's adjacent to that is that it uses the A-star pathfinding algorithm, which uses a diagonal heuristic, which means that it has this magic number that it uses to compare the cost of a diagonal movement relative to a non-diagonal movement, because it's kind of it like crossword connects adjacent squares that are touching either on the broadside or on the corner. And when it's on the corner, it has to be considered a little bit more expensive than the broadside because the distance traveled is a little greater. And so there's a magic number in the code for what that cost is, and maybe tweaking that would have an influence. But it seems like that would not affect the speed of the unit, but it would affect the efficiency of the path.
Okay.
So that'd be maybe the number two thing, is to see whether it's simply a function of the shape of the path that's returned.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know exactly, obviously, why it happens, but someone did say that apparently it is a common thing in games that people have to look at, moving faster in diagonal lines, they said.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially the older the game, the more likely it is to have been an oversight, I think.
Okay. So it was definitely an oversight, then it wasn't thought of and then
I
left or
I
something.
I don't know.
Okay.
I only have theories.
Yeah, okay.
For one thing, I haven't seen the code in 24 years, and the other is that I don't have the code. I don't have the code in front of me. So
Yeah. Because it's a very controversial topic at the minute, because there's like the hardcore, like top 20, top 10 players who know the game inside out. We know every pixel, every damage rate, everything. Um, and
yeah,
they're quite protective and don't want the game to change really at all. And some people think that that might have been an intentional thing to leave that diagonal line thing in. Because it will change build orders. Like, you won't be able to get a bulldozer over to the other side of the map, arrive there 5 seconds slower, which means your flame tank is out later. It changes the whole game quite a lot if you fix it.
all right.
So yeah, it's very controversial at the minute.
Yeah, yeah. There would be a lot of knock-on effects to fixing the problem, because then, yeah, other balance concerns would be
Yeah,
unbalanced. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
okay,
Yeah, likewise, when you send a bunch of GLA bikes across the playfield to go and scrub out the shroud, you know, this is something that Chris would do. He would build like 10 bikes and then go, just click in the mini map and just like spread out and
yeah,
unshroud the entire map, and they would all just go until they either reached the far corner or they died. Um, and then if the one going diagonally is going faster, then that would, if it really is going faster, doesn't that also mean that it's evading pursuit faster? Because if it evades pursuit faster, then it's more survivable, and then all of these knock-on effects.
true. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Were there any units or ideas or even an extra faction or anything like that that was discussed, but maybe there was no time to implement it, like something
Oh
that
yeah.
never came about that we have no idea about?
Yeah, there were a lot of those. The stack of design specs probably got cut by at least 50%.
Whoa, okay.
And I'd have to, like, some of them never got started, in fact. I would probably need days to think about it to recall some of those for you, but I mean, let me try
Yeah.
my best. I have this vague recollection that there was a structure that could house hackers. It was like a hacking center or something like that.
Yeah. No,
Um,
that's in the game. Internet Center.
the Internet Center, right?
Yeah, that's in the game. Yeah.
It's a cyber cafe, right? The um, no, there was something built on that idea that never got implemented,
Okay.
and I don't know. I have only the vaguest recollection. It's a long time ago, but I remember that there was a lot of chatter about it because the idea felt so cool. But I think it was determined that it was going to take more effort than we had time for. Because
Okay.
the things that we ended up implementing were the things that fit I don't know, it was something like 4 or 5 months of development time to do
Yeah.
all of Zero Hour. And that's really, really fast.
Hmm.
Um, The ships.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The Navy that made it into the product is embarrassingly bad. But there was quite a lot of high concept for ways of making that really, really good, and that never happened. Um, so a ship is a Humvee with a big backpack that drives through the ocean right now. It's
What is that? Is that what it's based on?
Well, I mean, essentially it is. It's using the same components.
Wow.
It has a different legal pathfinding surface, which causes the pathfinding algorithm to give you ocean paths instead of land paths. And that, other than that, it's the same locomotor, and that's why the ship will go, travel in a straight line and then go yeah,
Yeah.
like that
Yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
it does an elbow turn, and the ships don't do that. Um, And so the idea would be to have the big ships, like there's all the anecdotes about like how long it takes to turn the Titanic, that you really do need a completely different class of locomotor for Navy, and that never got implemented. So that's one of the things. Um,
Okay.
there was already a spec for that just described how the maps would have to have enough space for ships to maneuver in, and the different shoreline units that would um, have relationships to producing and docking and repairing naval things, and the ability to drive your fleets of uh, ground units onto the decks of the ships and to land your aircraft on the aircraft carrier. Um, and so those features are just very crudely and rawly simulated in the current implementation. Like I think there's a level that has an aircraft carrier that's static, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, and then there's some that have the battleships and they move like wheeled vehicles, and
Yeah.
it's embarrassing. I would love to see that done in a mature way.
Yeah.
Um,
So I've seen like the aircraft carrier, I've seen the battleship, which even though the movement might be a little bit weird, I still think both of those things are still really cool. There's obviously the GLA PT boat, I think it's called in the game.
yeah,
I think it's like hidden in the world builder. You have to place it maybe. But
yeah.
was there anything else? Was there like any submarines or any China Navy or anything that we didn't get to see or didn't get built?
I wish I could recall those for you, but
I know it's so
you
long
know,
ago,
yeah,
really
a
tested
lot
and
of a
limited.
lot of those things just got scrubbed in the first scoping pass. Where Chris and I and Graham and um, John, looked at everything and kind of came to an agreement of like what the cost of all of these things is going to be. And they said, well, dang, we got to cut half of our stack. And so the only time I saw it was in being able to tell Greg that it was too expensive.
Yeah.
Uh, and I remember during that phase, the Spectre gunship was going to get cut, but I like said, like, no, don't cut it. I love it. I love it so much. I promise I'll work overtime and do it. And so that's why the Spectre gunship didn't get cut.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So there's things that are in the game's code, but not like selectable in a normal multiplayer game. Like there's two bosses, who is it? Ironside and what's the other guy called? Deathstrike, the GLA boss. They're like, I don't think they got finished or something, and you can play some customized maps and you can get access to them, but they're not actually in the game or part of the campaign. Were they stripped due to time? Do you know? Or
That would have been a design team concern.
okay,
And I will bet that who would else be really good to interview would be John Combs, because
okay,
I bet that's something that he invented just on his own initiative and then just left it in the data files. Um, because
okay,
he would be the one who's like initiating all of these really esoteric experiments, um, of trying to mod the existing tech to do things no one ever expected. And so he's probably inventing bosses and generals and things, and maybe even making scripted levels that employed them as a test, but then ultimately we found that it was out of scope or we ran out of time.
Okay.
Um, but John might have a keen memory about like what those things were and why, what they were for.
Okay.
But that's something that John could have done, and like Chris and I wouldn't even know about it. That's the kind of work that John did.
Ah, okay.
Meaning
Um,
he didn't have to do code. He was just messing around with the ini files and making stuff up. Um,
so that's the guy that came up with the generals for Zero Hour, yeah, like the laser general and the demolition general. Is that
yeah,
the same guy? Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, well, he and the other designers like Jason and Greg, they all kind of shared the high concept, but John was able to implement some of the ideas without any engineer intervention, just by using existing tech, which is kind of a testament to the versatility of the component model that we had, is that the
Mhm.
components we had could be combined with each other and tuned in novel ways. It's still true.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. There's some other things that are still in the data files, like the laser ranger. I think there's a laser Comanche, a laser Burton that didn't make it into the game. Do you know anything about
Right.
those, or would it be a John
Um,
question?
you should have asked Chris when you had him, because
I did.
you did? Did he
Yeah, I
not
did.
remember?
Yeah, he didn't know. He just said generally sometimes things get put in the data files and they don't make it for various reasons, but he didn't know the exact reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the exact reason either. And I have a vague recollection of seeing those just in passing.
Okay.
But there's a lot of clutter in the I&I space of things that just aren't they're not ever included in a level, and they aren't included in the basic the basic tech tree. Because all of that is data driven. So, you could add the laser Burton to your tech tree if you wanted to, just messing around with the ini files. Um, and again, I think that John Combs would probably be able to tell the story about that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. Um
Maybe Graham knows too. You know, just a third pair of eyes to maybe have seen it and remember what it was about.
yeah, yeah, I'll definitely ask. Yeah, I really hope I get hold of John because yeah, we'd be fascinated to hear like were there any other like generals thought of that didn't came to be? And like we have the nuclear general or we have the tank general.
Right.
If there was any others that could have been that never came about, we'd be so interested in hearing about those. So I think John's the guy for that, isn't he?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he would be. Yeah, you could probably get Greg Black or Jason Bender would probably also remember, because that would have been something that would have been an ongoing conversation in the design team. Um,
Okay.
it wasn't really a thick layer of insulation between engineering and design, but there were things that were left in the idea space, and there were uh, I guess we were sheltered from it to spare our mental energies toward things that
Yeah.
we knew
Yeah.
we wanted to ship. Um, and so we'd see it, being checked into source control in the innies and go like, "Oh, laser Burton, what the heck is that?" Like, I don't know, and then get back to work,
Yeah.
that kind of a thing.
Yeah. It sounds like you were busy enough anyway. I'm
Yeah,
sure
super busy.
they could
I mean,
spare
like,
some stuff.
we were making the features like the ability to have generals, for example,
Yeah.
but once you could have a general, then you just put an ini file and you make a general, and then they have their own tech tree and their own power set and um, their own voiceover files and all of those kind of things.
Mhm. Um. Yeah, I think that's all of my questions that I had. Is there anything that I've not covered already that you wanted to say, or anything else interesting?
Let me look at my one pager. Oh, I don't think it. One thing that happened is one of the senior engineers on all of those projects, John Ahlquist, he died recently, and so I don't know if everybody is who knew John was aware of that, but maybe that can be discovered, by somebody watching this. But
Okay.
he was my mentor. Um, when I first started, I was put in a room with him so that I could learn, like I could become a good programmer by being near him, and it worked. And everyone really liked John, and he was like the dad of the engineering team. He knew everything about everything, and we just recently lost him. So
Yeah, sorry to hear that.
uh,
Um,
there's some people who deserve a lot more credit than Chris or Graham or I in the invention of the Sage engine. And the ones who I know about would be people like Mike Booth and Steven Johnson and Colin Day, who nobody's calling them to interview them because they uh, left the team before we shipped.
okay.
But I mean, if you want to just count up the occurrence of author names in the source code, those are the guys who really made the engine.
Okay.
Um, so Mike Booth, Steven Johnson, Colin Day. I'm probably Matt Campbell. There's a lot of guys that were
Yeah.
responsible for a lot of really ingenious and original and hard work that made the work of people like Chris and Graham and me possible.
Okay.
Because we were the ones who were coding to the game itself, and these are the guys who were building the engine.
Okay. So
Yeah.
they might be the ones that are familiar with this footage that got posted on YouTube. They might have even been some of the people that recorded some of this
I don't know,
footage. That,
maybe.
yeah, maybe.
Could be.
Okay. Yeah.
If you could find Mike Booth, if you could find Colin Day. I've lost touch with those guys completely, but they're out there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I'm more than open to speaking to anyone who worked on the Sage engine or Zero Hour or anything. So if they're watching, yeah, they can reach out to me. Otherwise, yeah, I'll see if Chris can put me in touch with any of them.
Yeah.
It'd be really, really interesting. Um, okay then. Is there, if anyone wants to follow you on social media or anything, is there any channel you want people to follow you on? Or I mean, you don't have to. I'm
Oh,
just giving you the opportunity.
the Discord.
Don't give me a Discord on this video. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll
Well,
keep
if
it.
anyone wants to
Yeah.
connect with me, they can easily find me just by my name um,
Yeah. Okay.
on
Uh.
Discord or anywhere else.
Yeah.
I'm on LinkedIn too.
Okay. And are you you're working at the moment on games, yeah, or are you looking for a new company or new project or anything?
I'm looking for a new permanent position right now, but right now I'm doing some freelance work in the interim.
Okay.
Um, so both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So hopefully there's some games companies that have got some big projects and something
Yeah.
exciting, or Generals 2. That will be the dream.
Ah, that sounds like fun.
Okay, well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for spending so much time. I know we've ran over nearly 2 hours and 15 minutes, so you can tell I'm passionate about the game, and I play it pretty much every day, and thousands of people watch it. So we really appreciate everything you did on the game and speaking to us now and answering all the questions. And one thing I'll
It's
do is make sure people are using the Spectre Gunship properly to make you to make you happy.
yeah, please use it. Um, Thank you. That
Yeah.
I'll feel so much better. I'll sleep better at night knowing that Spectre gunship targeting reticle is being clicked. Um,
Yeah.
all right. Well,
All
yeah,
right.
it's been my great pleasure speaking with you too, and I have a passion for it, but although more nostalgically, and do let me know if you hear of any other interesting turns of events or opinions or projects or anything like that.
Yeah, of course I will. Yeah. Okay, cool. Enjoy the rest of your day, and yeah, thanks again. I'll speak
Thanks.
to you soon.
Bye.
All right, take care. Bye bye. So yeah, that concludes the interview then, guys. What an absolute pleasure that was speaking to Mark. So once again, massive thank you to Mark for spending so long talking to me about a game that he made 25 years ago, trying to rack his brains, trying to get him to recall things that he did all that time ago. Really, really appreciate it. So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I'm sure a lot of you would have stuck around to the very end here. And yeah, like we discussed in this interview, I'll try and arrange a few more with some of the key people in the future. So GG, let me know your thought in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.